The Orion Prime Trading Station hung like a gleaming behemoth against the cosmic tapestry of stars, its titanium and glass structure reflecting the distant solar flares. In the year 2475, it had become the nexus of interplanetary commerce, where corporations vied for resources with the ferocity of ancient warlords. Here, amidst the cold steel and calculated exchanges, security was not merely a concern, it was an obsession. Valen stood at the panoramic observation deck, his steely eyes scanning the docking bays below. As Orion Prime's security director, he had orchestrated protections that would make military generals envious. But today, even those measures seemed insufficient. The upcoming Orion Resource Summit would bring together the wealthiest entities in the known galaxy, and with them, the most sophisticated threats. Sir, the transport from Morthar has arrived," announced a junior officer through the comms. Valen's mouth curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Excellent. Prepare the containment chamber." He straightened his immaculate uniform, emblazoned with the Orion Prime insignia, a stylized constellation wrapped around a shield. Today would mark a turning point in station security. Today, they would welcome an apex predator. The creature they called Kragoth emerged from the specialized transport vessel with a deliberate slowness that sent ripples of tension through the security detail. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, its exoskeletal frame gleamed with a metallic blue sheen under the harsh bay lights. 6 limbs, 4 with grasping appendages, and 2 with what appeared to be natural bladed extensions, moved with unsettling precision. Its head a horror of compound eyes and sensing organs swiveled to take in the surroundings. "Magnificent, isn't it?" whispered Valen to his executive officer. "The apex predator of Morthar's northern continent. Intelligent enough to follow complex commands, lethal enough to deter any threat." He approached the containment field, separating them from the creature. "And today, it's ours." The contract signing was a formality Kragoth's species communicated through a complex system of pheromones and neural signatures, but had developed enough understanding of humanoid customs to acknowledge binding agreements. The creature pressed a specialized appendage against the biometric scanner, leaving a unique molecular signature that would serve as its contractual assent. "Welcome to Orion Prime Kragoth," Valen said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had never known the emotion. "You're now our most valuable security asset." The creature's sensory stalks quivered slightly, the closest thing to acknowledgement it would offer. As they made their way through the station's secure corridors, station personnel pressed themselves against walls, their faces masks of fascination and terror. Rumors of Kragoth's species had circulated through the station for weeks. Mortharian apex predators were said to have evolved in an environment so hostile that they had developed not just physical weapons, but psychological warfare tactics. They could sense fear, anticipate movements, and according to some whispered accounts, induce paralysis through some unknown biological mechanism. "Your primary assignment begins tomorrow," Valen explained, as they reached the specially modified quarters prepared for the creature. The Orion Resource Summit will host 37 corporate delegations, 15 planetary governors, and numerous independent traders. Your presence alone should deter most trouble, but should anyone attempt to disrupt proceedings. He left the sentence, hanging a silent permission for violence. Kragoth's compound eyes reflected Valen's image in fractured repetition. The creature made no sound, but its understanding was evident in the way it surveyed the room, noting exits, ventilation ducts, and potential weapons. "Rest well," Valen said, activating the room's security protocols. "Tomorrow you make history." As the door sealed shut, Valen allowed himself a moment of unguarded satisfaction. The Orion Prime Board had questioned his extreme security measures, balked at the astronomical fee for Kragoth's services. But they would understand soon enough. In the cutthroat arena of interstellar commerce, innovation in security wasn't just advisable, it was essential. And what could be more innovative than harnessing the galaxy's most perfect killing machine? What Valen didn't share with anyone, not even his most trusted lieutenants, was that security wasn't his only concern. The summit would bring together his corporation's most significant rivals. Having Kragoth at his disposal offered possibilities. Possibilities that extended well beyond mere protection. Dawn cycle on the station brought with it a flurry of activity. The first delegations were already docking their ship's emblems, announcing corporate affiliations that controlled entire solar systems. Security checkpoints hummed with scanners and identification verifiers. And at the center of it all stood Kragoth, a silent sentinel beside Valen, as he greeted the early arrivals. The creature's effect was immediate and profound. Conversations hushed as delegations passed. Eyes widened, steps quickened. The Nebulon Mining Consortium's CEO, a woman known for facing down space, pirates without flinching, visibly paled when Kragoth's sensory stalks turned in her direction. "A bold choice, Director Valen," she murmured, her voice steady, despite her evident discomfort. "I wasn't aware that Mortharian sentients were available for employment." "Kragoth represents our commitment to absolute security," Valen replied smoothly. "The Orion Prime Board wishes to ensure that all delegates can conduct business without concern for their safety." She nodded, though her eyes never left the creature. "Indeed. Though one wonders what threats you anticipate that would necessitate such extreme measures." Before Valen could respond, a commotion erupted at the main entrance to the reception hall. A delegate from the Proxima Centauri Collective, a humanoid with the characteristic blue-tinged skin of his system, was arguing vehemently with security personnel. "This is outrageous. I am a fully accredited representative." Sir, our scanners detected anomalies in your diplomatic case," the security officer explained, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Protocol requires—" "Your scanners are faulty. I demand to speak with—" Valen nodded almost imperceptibly toward Kragoth. The creature moved with shocking speed for its size, covering the distance to the disturbance in fluid strides that seemed to defy its mass. The arguing delegate froze mid-sentence as Kragoth loomed over him, compound eyes reflecting his terrified expression in dozens of identical images. "Is there a problem here?" Valen asked, his tone pleasant, but edged with authority, as he followed in Kragoth's wake. The security officer straightened. "Scan anomalies in the diplomatic case, sir. Consistent with concealed weapons." "I have brought no weapons," the delegate protested, though his voice had lost its earlier indignation. "This is a standard data case with protected trade information." Valen smiled thinly. "I'm sure it's merely a misunderstanding. However, station protocol is absolute." He turned to Kragoth. "Escort our esteemed delegate to secondary screening, please. Ensure he receives priority attention." Kragoth's upper limbs extended slightly, not quite touching the delegate, but creating an unmistakable corridor of movement. The Proximan's face drained of color, the usual blue tint fading to a sickly gray. Without further protest, he allowed himself to be guided away from the main reception. The incident set the tone for the day. Word spread quickly through the arriving delegations. Orion Prime's new security measure was as effective as it was terrifying. By midday, 3 more delegates had been escorted to secondary screening. One was found with unauthorized communication devices. Another carried restricted biotechnology samples. The third was released after extensive questioning, his only crime apparently being a naturally elevated heart rate that had triggered security alerts. Valen watched it all with calculated satisfaction. Fear was proving to be an extraordinarily effective security tool. Even better, the corporations he most hoped to disadvantage were among those subjected to the heightened scrutiny. If their negotiations were delayed, if their representatives were rattled during critical discussions, well, that was merely an unfortunate side effect of thorough security protocols. As the first day of preliminary meetings wound down, Valen received an urgent communication from the station's docking control. "Sir, we've received an unscheduled arrival request from an Earth diplomatic vessel," reported the docking officer, her voice carefully neutral. "They claim to have late accreditation for the summit." Valen frowned. Earth's involvement in the Orion Resource Summit had been a point of contention from the beginning. The planet's policies on sustainable resource extraction and fair trade practices were at odds with many of the participating corporations' interests. That they would send a delegation at all was surprising. That they would arrive unannounced was suspicious. "Scan their vessel thoroughly," he ordered. "Any anomalies, any at all, and they're to be held in orbital quarantine." "Yes, sir," though preliminary scans show minimal armaments standard for a diplomatic vessel. The delegation appears to be led by Ambassador Mira Hale. Valen's frown deepened. Hale was known throughout the system as Earth's most effective negotiator and its most idealistic. Her presence complicated matters considerably. "Proceed with docking, but implement highest-level security protocols, and have Kregoth ready to assist with their reception." The Earth vessel docked with the precision expected of an experienced diplomatic crew. It was smaller than most of the corporate ships its design, emphasizing function over ostentation. As the airlock cycled open, Valen stood waiting, flanked by a security detail and the imposing presence of Kregoth. Ambassador Mira Hale emerged first, her dark complexion contrasting with the silver white of her precisely cut hair. Though in her 60s, she moved with the energy of someone decades younger, her posture straight, her gaze direct. She wore the simple but elegant attire of Earth's diplomatic corps' sustainable fabrics, in deep blues, that symbolized both her planet's oceans and its commitment to preserving them across the galaxy. "Director Valen," she greeted him, extending a hand. "Thank you for accommodating our late arrival. Communications difficulties delayed our accreditation transmission." Valen took her hand briefly, his grip firm but not challenging. "Ambassador Hale, the Orion Prime Board was not expecting Earth representation at this summit." Her smile was polite but unyielding. "Earth has interests in any discussion concerning resource extraction in sectors adjacent to our colonial developments. As you know." Behind her, 5 additional delegates emerged, 3 humans and 2 individuals from Earth-allied species. Among them was a tall, athletic woman, whose bearing marked her as military, despite her civilian attire. Lieutenant Colonel Rin Vos Valen recalled from intelligence briefings Hale's head of security and a decorated veteran of the Proxima Centauri conflict. It was Vos who first seemed to notice Kregoth, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the creature. Unlike the other delegates who had encountered the Mortharian, however, her expression showed calculation rather than fear. "An interesting choice for summit security," Hale commented, following Vos's gaze to Kregoth. "I wasn't aware that Mortharian sentients were permitted off-world without environmental restrictions." "Kregoth is here under special dispensation," Valen replied smoothly. "The Orion Prime Board is committed to providing unparalleled security for all delegates." Hale nodded, though something in her expression suggested she found the explanation insufficient. "Of course. Safety first." She turned to her delegation. "Shall we settle in? I understand preliminary discussions have already begun." As the Earth delegation moved to follow their assigned security escort, something unexpected happened. Kregoth, who had remained motionless throughout the exchange, suddenly shifted position. Its sensory stalks extended, fully quivering with what appeared to be intensified perception. Then, to Valen's astonishment, it moved not toward the Earth delegates, as might be expected for a security escort, but alongside them, as if protective. "Kregoth," Valen said sharply, "remain at your post." The creature hesitated, compound eyes swiveling between Valen and the Earth delegation. For a moment, tension crackled in the air, like static electricity. Then slowly, it returned to its position beside Valen. Lieutenant Colonel Vos had turned at the movement, her hand instinctively moving toward where a weapon would normally be holstered. Finding nothing, Earth delegations notoriously traveled unarmed as a matter of principle. She instead made a subtle gesture to her team, positioning them more defensively around Ambassador Hale. "Your security asset seems interested in our delegation," Vos observed, her tone carefully neutral. Valen forced a smile. "Merely thorough. Kragoth assesses all potential variables in the security environment. Indeed. Voss's gaze lingered on the creature for a moment longer, before she turned to follow her delegation. As they moved away, Valen activated his private communication link to his security command center. "I want constant surveillance on the Earth delegation," he ordered quietly. "And schedule a diagnostic evaluation of Kragoth's neural compliance systems. Immediately." Something had just occurred that should have been impossible under the terms of Kragoth's contract. The creature had shown independent judgment, perhaps even preference. For a security system predicated on absolute control, this was more than a malfunction. It was a potential catastrophe. What Valen couldn't know was that deep within Kragoth's alien neurophysiology, primitive instincts far older than contracts or commerce were stirring to life. Instincts that would soon shatter the delicate balance of power on Orion Prime. The evening cycle brought a formal reception for all summit delegates, held in the station's grand atrium. Towering transparisteel windows offered spectacular views of the nearby nebula, its swirling gases illuminated by the light of newly forming stars. Against this backdrop, representatives from across the galaxy engaged in the delicate dance of pre-negotiation diplomacy, assessing alliances, identifying weaknesses, establishing positions of strength. Valen observed it all from a strategic position near the main entrance Kragoth, a silent sentinel beside him. The diagnostic evaluation had revealed nothing amiss in the creature's neural compliance systems, yet Valen remained uneasy. He had built his career on anticipating threats before they materialized, and something about Kragoth's behavior during the Earth delegation's arrival had triggered his well-honed instincts. "Sir," his executive officer murmured, approaching discreetly, "we've had another incident." The representative from Tau Ceti's mining consortium was found accessing restricted database sectors. Security has him in Isolation Chamber 3. Valen nodded satisfaction, momentarily displacing his concerns. Tau Ceti was a direct competitor, with his own corporate interests. Ensure that news of his indiscretion spreads appropriately among the delegates. Nothing official, of course, but a reminder of the consequences of stepping outside established protocols. "Yes, sir. And the matter we discussed earlier about the Earth delegation. Continue enhanced surveillance. I want to know their every movement, every communication." Valen's gaze drifted across the room to where Ambassador Hale was engaged in conversation with representatives from 3 outer rim systems, all known for their resistance to aggressive resource extraction methods. "They're building a coalition. I need to know against what specifically." "Understood. And Kragoth's role?" Valen considered for a moment. "Keep it close to me for now. I want to observe its behavior directly." Across the atrium, Lieutenant Colonel Voss was conducting her own surveillance, her experienced eyes cataloging potential threats, even as she maintained a relaxed demeanor beside Ambassador Hale. She had noticed Valen's exceptional interest in their delegation and had quietly instructed her team to operate under the assumption that all their communications were being monitored. What concerned her most, however, was the Mortharian creature. During her military career, Voss had encountered many species, including some used as biological weapons during the Proxima conflict. But Kragoth was different. Its behavior upon their arrival had been anomalous, not aggressive but almost familiar, as if it recognized something in them. "Your thoughts seem elsewhere," Colonel Ambassador Hale noted quietly momentarily, disengaging from her diplomatic conversation. Voss shifted slightly, positioning herself to better observe both Valen and Kragoth while speaking. "Something isn't right about that creature they're using for security. Mortharians are territorial apex predators with complex social structures. They don't typically accept subordinate roles, especially among other species." Hale's expression remained pleasantly neutral, for the benefit of observing eyes, but her voice took on a sharper edge. "You believe it poses a threat to our delegation?" "I'm not certain," Voss admitted. "But its reaction to us was atypical, almost protective, which contradicts everything in its evolutionary psychology." She hesitated, then added, "During the Proxima conflict, there were rumors that some Mortharian subspecies had formed alliances with human outposts. Voluntary symbiotic relationships, not the forced servitude we're seeing here." "Interesting," Hale murmured. "And potentially useful information. Continue your observations, Colonel, but discreetly. Director Valen strikes me as someone who doesn't appreciate having his security arrangements questioned. With respect, Ambassador, he strikes me as someone with motivations extending beyond station security." Hale's mouth quirked in a small smile. "On that, we are in complete agreement." The reception continued well into the night cycle, with alliances forming and dissolving like the nebula gases, visible through the atrium windows. Throughout it all, Kragoth remained by Valen's side, an intimidating presence that ensured conversations hushed whenever they approached. Yet, Voss, watching carefully, noticed something subtle: the creature's sensory stalks repeatedly oriented toward the Earth delegation, even when its main visual organs were directed elsewhere. It was tracking them. The question was why. As the reception wound down, Valen received another urgent communication. The Tau Ceti representative in detention had experienced a medical episode during questioning. Nothing life-threatening, the report assured, but significant enough to require extended treatment in the station's medical facility, effectively removing him from the summit's crucial opening sessions. Valen acknowledged the report with grim satisfaction. One more competitor neutralized, at least temporarily. His strategy was working perfectly. The combination of Kragoth's intimidating presence and his own carefully orchestrated security incidents was creating exactly the environment of controlled fear and selective enforcement he needed. Yet, as he watched Ambassador Hale bid goodnight to her final conversation, partners, that nagging sense of unease returned. The Earth delegation represented an unknown variable in his carefully calibrated equation, one that seemed to have an inexplicable connection to his most powerful asset. "Kragoth," he said softly, "you will accompany me to a special assignment." The creature's sensory stalks quivered in acknowledgement, but Valen noted with growing concern that its attention remained fixed on the departing Earth delegates for several seconds longer than appropriate. Yes, something would have to be done about this anomaly, and soon before the summit's most critical negotiations began. What he didn't realize was that across the vast evolutionary gap separating their species, Kragoth had already begun calculating its own strategy, one that would upend the balance of power on Orion Prime in ways no one could predict. The first full day of the Orion Resource Summit dawned with a tension that permeated the station like an invisible gas. Delegates moved through the corridors in tight groups, security details alert, conversations muted. The previous day's incidents had achieved exactly the atmosphere Valen desired, one of uncertainty and caution that would make his corporate allies' aggressive proposals seem like beacons of stability. The main conference chamber was a marvel of interstellar architecture, a vast circular room with tiered seating surrounding a central presentation area. Holographic displays shimmered above specialized projectors, showing resource maps of contested star systems and statistical analyses of extraction potentials. At the highest tier, observation boxes housed station security and recording equipment. Valen stood at the chamber's main entrance, personally overseeing the security screening of each delegation. Kragoth loomed beside him, its presence causing even the most powerful corporate representatives to submit to additional scans without protest. "Director, a moment of your time," called a familiar voice. Ambassador Hale approached her delegation, following in precise formation. Unlike the corporate representatives with their ostentatious displays of wealth and status, the Earth contingent was notably understated, their attire formal, but practical, their equipment minimal. "Ambassador," Valen acknowledged with a thin smile. "I trust your accommodations were satisfactory." "Quite." Her eyes flickered briefly to Kragoth before returning to Valen. "Though I must admit to some curiosity about today's agenda. The revised schedule we received this morning omits the planned discussion on regenerative extraction methods in the Tau Ceti sector." Valen's smile remained fixed. A necessary adjustment. The Tau Ceti representative experienced health complications last night. Nothing serious, he added smoothly, but sufficient to require postponement of that particular session. Lieutenant Colonel Voss, standing just behind Hale, made no comment, but her eyes narrowed fractionally. "How unfortunate," Hale replied, her tone suggesting she found the timing suspicious rather than unfortunate. "Perhaps my delegation could offer alternative perspectives on the sector, as we've conducted extensive sustainability studies there." "A generous offer, but the board feels it would be inappropriate to proceed without proper representation from all stakeholders." Valen gestured toward the security checkpoint. "Now, if you'll excuse the formalities, even diplomatic delegations must undergo standard screening." As the Earth contingent moved through the security protocols, Valen noted with increasing unease that Kragoth's attention had once again fixed on them with unusual intensity. The creature's upper limbs had shifted position slightly, its bladed appendages now angled away from the Earth delegates, rather than toward them, a subtle but significant change in its defensive posture. "Kragoth," Valen said sharply, "assume primary security stance." The creature did not immediately respond, its compound eyes remaining fixed on Lieutenant Colonel Voss, who had paused briefly during her security scan to return its gaze. For 3 long seconds, an eternity in security response time, Kragoth remained motionless. Then, with a fluidity that belied its massive frame, it shifted back into standard position. Valen's jaw tightened. This was beyond a minor anomaly now. The creature was showing clear signs of independent judgment, perhaps even insubordination. He tapped a discrete command into his wrist console, activating a subsonic neural compliance signal that should have instantly reinforced Kragoth's contractual obligations. The creature's sensory stalks quivered momentarily, but otherwise it showed no reaction to the compliance measure. A cold tendril of alarm wound its way through Valen's confidence. The Mortharian was supposed to be under absolute control, its fearsome capabilities harnessed by technological and contractual constraints that left no room for autonomy. If those constraints were failing— "Ah, sir," interrupted a security officer. "All delegations are now present. The summit chairman is requesting permission to begin proceedings." Valen forced his attention back to the immediate task. "Granted. Seal the chamber and activate full-spectrum monitoring." He would deal with the Kragoth situation. After the opening session, perhaps a complete neural reset would be required, though that would temporarily reduce the creature's effectiveness. As delegates took their places in the vast chamber, the subtle power dynamics of interstellar politics manifested in seating arrangements and conversational groupings. Corporate alliances clustered together, while independent delegates sought neutral territories. The Earth delegation, Valen noted with irritation, had positioned themselves strategically near representatives from 3 resource-rich but politically independent systems, prime targets for their sustainability agenda. The summit chairman, a Rigelian, known for his impartiality, which Valen had ensured through substantial unofficial payments, called the gathering to order. His resonant voice echoed through the chamber as he outlined the summit's objectives to establish extraction rights in newly accessible sectors, to resolve disputes over contested resources, and to set regulatory standards for the coming decade. Valen took his place in a specialized security alcove near the chairman's podium, Kragoth, standing at rigid attention beside him. From this position, he could observe the entire chamber while maintaining the appearance of neutral security oversight. Perfect for his dual purposes of maintaining control while advancing his corporate allies' interests. The opening presentations proceeded according to plan. Representatives from major extraction corporations showcased impressive projections of resource yields and economic benefits, carefully sidestepping questions of environmental impact and indigenous rights. When challenged primarily by the Earth delegation and their growing coalition of supporters, the chairman skillfully limited debate, citing time constraints and procedural protocols. During a particularly heated exchange over mining rights in the Epsilon Eridani system, Valen noticed Ambassador Hale pass a data chip to Lieutenant Colonel Voss, who then discreetly activated a personal communication device. Suspicious, he signaled to his surveillance team to intercept the transmission. Moments later, a priority alert flashed on his console. The transmission had been directed to Earth's central government, specifically to their Resource Protection Agency. Its contents were encrypted, but the fact of the communication itself violated Summit protocols requiring all external communications to be cleared through station channels. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Chairman Valen announced, rising from his seat. "I must interrupt proceedings due to a security matter requiring immediate attention." All eyes turned to him as he continued, "We have detected unauthorized communications from within this chamber, a clear violation of Summit protocols and potentially a breach of confidentiality agreements." Murmurs of concern spread through the delegates as Valen descended to the central floor, Kragoth following in his shadow. "In the interest of transparency, I must identify the source of this breach." He turned deliberately toward the Earth delegation. "Ambassador Hale, your delegation has transmitted encrypted data to Earth without proper clearance. Under station security protocols, I am obligated to confiscate all communication devices and data storage for examination." Hale rose slowly, her expression composed, but her eyes hard as polished stone. "Director Valen, Earth maintains sovereign communication rights under Interstellar Diplomatic Accord Section 7. Our transmission contained no proprietary information, merely updates to our government on publicly available proceedings." "That will be for security review to determine," Valen replied. He gestured, and a team of armed security officers moved to surround the Earth delegation. "Your devices, please, and the data chip you transferred to Colonel Voss." Lieutenant Colonel Voss stood then, her posture shifting subtly into a defensive stance, despite her lack of visible weapons. "This is a clear overreach of Security Authority, Director. If you have concerns about our communications, the proper procedure is to file a formal complaint with the Diplomatic Corps, not to confiscate sovereign property." Valen smiled thinly. "Station security supersedes diplomatic protocol when breaches occur within our jurisdiction." He nodded to his security team. "Proceed with the confiscation." As the officers advanced, tension electrified the chamber. Other delegates rose from their seats, some in protest, others merely seeking distance from the potential confrontation. The chairman called ineffectually for order, his authority suddenly secondary to the unfolding security drama. It was at this precise moment that the situation spiraled beyond Valen's careful control. Kragoth, who had remained positioned behind Valen throughout the exchange, suddenly moved with explosive speed. But instead of advancing toward the Earth delegation, as might be expected, it positioned itself between them and the security team, its massive frame forming a barrier, its bladed limbs extended in an unmistakable defensive posture, protecting them. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber froze in collective shock. Then chaos erupted. "Stand down!" Valen shouted, activating emergency compliance protocols in his wrist console. "Kragoth, stand down immediately." The creature didn't move. Its sensory stalks were fully extended, scanning in all directions, its compound eyes fixed on the security team with predatory focus. Lieutenant Colonel Voss reacted first among the Earth delegation, her military training overriding surprise. "Ambassador, defensive formation," she ordered sharply, pulling Hale behind her as the rest of their team closed ranks. Valen's security officers hesitated, their weapons half raised, uncertain how to proceed against the station's own premier security asset. One, braver, or perhaps less intelligent than his colleagues, advanced a step plasma rifle leveled at Kragoth's central mass. "Final warning." The officer announced, his voice impressively steady given the circumstances. "Resume your assigned position or—" He never finished the sentence. Kragoth moved with a speed that defied its size, one bladed limb, sweeping in a precise arc that severed the rifle barrel cleanly from its housing. The weapon sparked and died, its power cell thankfully remaining stable rather than detonating. The officer stumbled backward unharmed, but thoroughly shocked. His colleagues immediately raised their weapons in response, creating a standoff that threatened to explode into violent chaos at any moment. "Hold your fire," Valen commanded, calculating rapidly. A firefight in the summit chamber, with delegations from every major power present, would be catastrophic, not just for the summit, but for his career and possibly his life. He needed to regain control of the situation, and quickly. Ambassador Hale stepped forward, then moving alongside Voss despite the colonel's attempt to keep her protected. "Perhaps," she said, her voice projecting calm authority that cut through the tension, "we should all take a step back and consider what's happening here." She turned to face Kregoth, directly, showing remarkable courage in addressing the creature that even hardened security personnel approached with caution. "You've chosen to protect, rather than threaten us. Why?" The chamber fell silent as the ambassador addressed the Mortharian, as one would an equal, rather than a security asset or weapon. Kregoth's sensory stalks oriented fully toward her, its posture still defensive, but somehow less threatening. Ambassador Valen interjected sharply. "This creature is not capable of the kind of reasoned dialogue you're attempting. It operates on programmed responses and biological imperatives, nothing more." "I disagree," Voss said, her eyes never leaving Kregoth. "Mortharians have complex social structures and sophisticated communication systems. They're not simply biological weapons to be pointed at targets." She studied the creature with increasing intensity. "This one is making a choice, one that contradicts its supposed programming." Valen's patience, already stretched thin, snapped. "Enough of this nonsense. Security team, activate containment protocols. All delegates will clear the chamber immediately, while we deal with this malfunction." But as security personnel began herding reluctant delegates toward the exits, Kregoth made its next move. With precision that demonstrated both intelligence and intent, it reached one of its manipulative limbs toward a nearby console and tapped a specific sequence of controls. Instantly, the chamber's main display screens flickered to life, showing security footage from the previous night, specifically the medical episode of the Tau Ceti representative. The footage clearly showed not a natural health crisis, but a deliberate administration of some substance by Valen's security personnel during interrogation. Gasps and exclamations of shock echoed through the chamber as the footage continued, showing similar incidents, with other delegates representing corporations competing with Valen's interests. "This is fabricated," Valen shouted, lunging for the nearest control panel. "Security override authorization, Valen Prime Alpha." The screens flickered, but didn't shut down. Instead, they switched to new footage this time, showing Valen himself giving explicit instructions to target specific delegations for enhanced security measures and negotiation disadvantages. The summit chairman, his face a mask of horrified realization, found his voice at last. "Director Valen explained this immediately." But Valen was beyond explanations. His carefully constructed scheme was collapsing around him, and primitive instinct was replacing calculated strategy. "Containment breach," he shouted into his communicator. "All security teams to the main chamber. Lethal protocols authorized." The chamber doors slammed open as heavily armed security personnel poured in their weapons, trained not just on Kregoth, but on the Earth delegation as well. Delegates scrambled for cover, some diving beneath seats, others pressing themselves against walls in panic. "Stop this madness, Valen," Ambassador Hale demanded, her composure finally cracking in the face of imminent violence. "You'll create an interstellar incident. The incident will be unfortunate terrorist action by Earth radicals." Valen snarled, his facade of professional detachment completely abandoned, necessitating regrettably decisive security response. As security teams formed firing positions, Kregoth made a sound for the first time since its arrival on the station, a resonant vibration that seemed to emanate not from any identifiable vocal organ, but from its entire exoskeletal structure. The sound rippled through the chamber, causing weapons to tremble in the hands of security personnel and delegates to press hands against ears in discomfort. Lieutenant Colonel Voss's eyes widened in sudden understanding. "It's calling for help," she whispered. Before anyone could question her statement, the station's emergency alarms activated their wailing, creating a disorienting counterpoint to Kragoth's continuing resonance. The main doors to the chamber burst open once more, but this time, it wasn't additional security forces that entered. It was Mortharians. 3 of them, each as imposing as Kragoth, swept into the chamber with the fluid grace of apex predators. Unlike Kragoth, they wore no restraining devices, no signs of contractual service. They moved with the confidence of equals, not assets. "Impossible!" Valen breathed, his face draining of color. "There are no other Mortharians on the station." Correction. Ambassador Hale said, a hint of satisfaction creeping into her voice, despite the dire circumstances. There were no other Mortharians declared on the station manifest. Earth's delegation includes scientific and cultural attachés of various species, including Mortharian observers, traveling under diplomatic protection. The new arrivals positioned themselves strategically around the chamber, their presence creating an immediate stalemate with Valen's security forces. No shots had been fired, but the situation balanced on a knife's edge of potential violence. Voss stepped forward, placing herself deliberately between the opposing forces. "This has gone far enough," she addressed not Valen, but the assembled delegates, who watched in stunned silence from the chamber's perimeter. "What you've witnessed today is the culmination of a systematic abuse of power. Director Valen has been using station security to manipulate summit outcomes, targeting delegates whose positions conflict with his corporate interests." Baseless accusations. Valen spat, though his vehemence was undercut by the damning footage still playing on the chamber's screens. Furthermore, Voss continued, he is engaged in the exploitation of sentient beings for security purposes, specifically forcing Kragoth into contractual servitude through neural compliance technology that violates multiple interstellar rights conventions. The summit chairman, finding unexpected courage in the chaos, stepped into the center of the chamber. "These are serious allegations that require immediate investigation. Director Valen, I am temporarily relieving you of your security authority, pending review by the Orion Prime Board." "You have no such authority," Valen hissed, but the conviction in his voice was fading as he watched delegates nodding in agreement with the chairman's decision. "Actually, he does," came a new voice. A member of the Orion Prime Board had risen from among the corporate delegates, an older woman whose insignia indicated she held senior rank within the station's governance structure. "And the board concurs with this action. Security forces will stand down immediately." For a moment it seemed Valen might order his teams to fire anyway, his face contorted with thwarted rage and calculation. But as his gaze swept the room, taking in the armed standoff, the horrified delegates, the damning evidence still playing on loop reason, finally reasserted itself. With a gesture of bitter resignation, he signaled his security teams to lower their weapons. As the immediate threat of violence receded, Ambassador Hale approached Kragoth, stopping at a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said simply, "for choosing to protect rather than harm." The creature's sensory stalks quivered in what might have been acknowledgement. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, it produced a series of complex clicks and vibration sounds that seemed meaningless to most ears. But not to all. One of the newly arrived Mortharians stepped forward, positioning itself next to Kragoth. It turned toward Ambassador Hale and produced a similar series of sounds which were instantly translated by a small device worn by one of the Earth delegates. "He says he recognized the truth in you," the translator announced, his voice carrying in the hushed chamber. Mortharians have evolved to detect deception across species boundaries, a survival mechanism from their homeworld, where mimicry is common among predator species. He perceived honesty in your delegation and calculated that allying with truth speakers offered better odds for collective survival than remaining bound to deception. Valen, still restrained by two members of his own security team, who had apparently decided which way the wind was blowing, laughed bitterly. So, the fearsome apex predator turns out to be nothing more than a glorified lie detector. How poetic. The translator continued after another series of sounds from the Mortharian. Not merely a detector of lies, but a seeker of alliances that strengthen rather than exploit. His species evolved not just as predators, but as complex social beings who recognize that strongest survival comes through mutual support, not domination. Ambassador Hale nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Like the symbiotic relationships your kind formed with human outposts during the Proxima conflict. Not forced service, but mutual benefit. The Mortharian's sensory stalks extended in what appeared to be affirmation. Lieutenant Colonel Voss turned to the summit chairman and the Orion Prime board member. I suggest we adjourn these proceedings until a full investigation into Director Valen's activities can be completed. And, she added, with pointed emphasis, until the legal status of Kragoth can be properly addressed under interstellar sentient rights conventions. The chairman nodded, visibly relieved to have a path forward that didn't involve bloodshed in his chamber. Agreed. All formal sessions are suspended for 24 station hours. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, many casting wary glances at both the Mortharians and Valen's subdued security forces, Ambassador Hale approached the board member who had intervened. Thank you for your timely support, Hale said quietly, though I admit to some curiosity about your swift decision. The board member's smile held no warmth. Don't mistake pragmatism for alliance, Ambassador. Valen's methods had become a liability to the station's reputation. The board couldn't afford to be associated with such obvious impropriety. Obvious being the operative word, Voss murmured just loudly enough to be heard. The board member inclined her head slightly, neither confirming nor denying the implication. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a significant security restructuring to begin. She departed, already speaking rapidly into her communication device. Hale turned to Voss as the chamber emptied. Well, Colonel, I'd say this summit has taken an unexpected turn. Indeed, Ambassador. Voss's gaze went to Kragoth and the other Mortharians, who were communicating among themselves through complex patterns of movement and sound. Though perhaps not entirely unexpected, our scientific attachés have been documenting Mortharian social behaviors for years. Their capacity for cross-species alliance formation is precisely why we included them in our delegation, though I admit I never anticipated they'd be reuniting with a countryman pressed into service as a security weapon. Fortune favors the prepared, Hale mused. She watched as Kragoth moved with its fellow Mortharians toward the exit, its posture noticeably different now, more fluid, less rigidly controlled. The neural compliance devices still attached to its exoskeleton seemed powerless now, perhaps disabled during the confrontation. What happens now? Voss asked, nodding toward the departing creatures. Now, Hale replied, we negotiate, not just for resource extraction policies, but for recognition of Mortharian rights throughout controlled space. They've proven themselves to be far more than biological weapons or security assets. Valen won't go down without a fight, Voss warned. Men like him rarely do. Let him fight, Hale said, her voice hardening slightly. The evidence is damning, and, more importantly, it's public. The corporate interests he represents will distance themselves, rather than risk association with his methods. As they followed the last delegates out of the chamber, the screens finally darkened, plunging the room into shadow. In the dimness, the events that had just transpired seemed almost dreamlike, a momentary rupture in the carefully constructed facade of interstellar diplomacy. But the consequences would be anything but ephemeral. On Orion Prime, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably, all because an apex predator had recognized a fundamental truth. Sometimes survival meant switching sides. In the aftermath of what station personnel were already calling the summit standoff. Orion Prime hummed with unprecedented activity. Emergency meetings of the station board convened behind closed doors. Corporate representatives huddled in private chambers, recalibrating strategies and alliances. And in the secure diplomatic quarters assigned to the Earth delegation, Ambassador Hale presided over perhaps the most unusual negotiation in recent interstellar history. "Let me be certain I understand correctly," she said, addressing the Mortharian translator, who had emerged as the primary spokesperson for the group. Kregoth was not taken against his will, but rather volunteered for a cultural exchange program that was subsequently misrepresented by the recruitment agency. The translator, a Mortharian named Vrex, who had spent 15 Earth years working with human scientists, produced a series of sounds that their human translator converted to speech. "Correct. Our kind seeks knowledge of other species through immersion." Kregoth accepted what was presented as a diplomatic security position, an opportunity to understand station operations while providing legitimate protection services. The neural compliance devices were added after his arrival without consent. Lieutenant Colonel Voss, seated beside Hale, frowned. "That constitutes sentient rights violation under at least 3 interstellar conventions." Ambassador Hale nodded thoughtfully. "Which gives us considerable leverage in the upcoming proceedings. The question is, how do we wish to use it?" The room fell silent as all present human diplomats, scientific attachés, and 4 Mortharians, including Kregoth, considered the implications. Outside their conference room, the station continued its business, though, with a subdued tension that permeated every interaction. News of Director Valen's detention and the evidence against him had spread rapidly, creating a power vacuum that various factions were already maneuvering to fill. "Our priority must be preventing similar exploitation in the future," said Dr. Eleanor Reeves, the delegation's xenobiological ethics specialist. Unlike others who treated the Mortharians with lingering apprehension, she addressed them directly, having studied their culture extensively. "That means formal recognition of Mortharian sentient status throughout Orion-controlled space." Kregoth, who had remained mostly silent during the discussion, suddenly produced a complex series of vibrations that caused the other Mortharians to extend their sensory stalks in apparent agreement. "He says," the translator explained, "that recognition alone is insufficient. What's needed is understanding. Humans and other species must learn that apex predators are not merely weapons to be wielded or threats to be contained. Evolutionary history as hunters does not preclude capacity for cooperation, ethics, or peace." Ambassador Hale smiled slightly. "A fair point, and one that extends beyond Mortharians to many species classified primarily by their predatory capabilities. There's potential here for something more significant than merely resolving this incident." Voss observed her tactical mind, always seeking strategic advantages. "If we frame this correctly, we could establish a new precedent for interspecies relations throughout the Sector 1, based on mutual respect rather than exploitation or fear." The discussion continued for hours, plans forming and reforming as various perspectives were considered. The Mortharians proved to be sophisticated strategic thinkers, their evolutionary history as apex predators having honed not just physical capabilities, but intellectual and social ones as well. They understood the value of symbolic actions, of creating narratives that could reshape perceptions across cultural boundaries. As the station's artificial night cycle began, a consensus emerged, one that would transform what had begun as a security crisis into an unprecedented diplomatic opportunity. Morning found Orion Prime's main conference chamber transformed. Where once delegates had been arranged in hierarchical tiers, reflecting corporate power and political influence, now they sat in a circular formation that eliminated obvious status distinctions. At the center stood a symbolic display, the shattered remains of Kregoth's neural compliance devices, removed overnight by Earth's technical specialists. The summit chairman, visibly uncomfortable with the altered protocols, but unwilling to object given recent events, called the emergency session to order. "Distinguished delegates, we reconvene under unusual circumstances," In light of yesterday's disruption and the ongoing investigation into security practices, the Orion Prime Board has approved a modified agenda proposed by the Earth delegation and supported by representatives from 17 systems. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Some curious others, clearly displeased with the sudden shift in summit dynamics. The temporary security director, hastily appointed from the station's civilian administration after Valen's detention, stood nervously at the chamber entrance, flanked by a visibly reduced security team. Ambassador Hale rose to address the gathering, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension permeating the room. Esteemed colleagues, yesterday we witnessed the consequences of approaching interspecies relations through a lens of dominance rather than partnership. Today, we have an opportunity to establish a new paradigm, one that recognizes the fundamental dignity of all sentient beings, regardless of their evolutionary origins or physical capabilities. She gestured toward the chamber entrance where Kragoth and the other Mortharians waited. I present not security assets or biological weapons, but diplomatic representatives from Morthar, a world whose inhabitants have too long been valued only for their predatory attributes, rather than their complex culture and sophisticated social structures. As the Mortharians entered, many delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, conditioned fear responses, overriding intellectual understanding. But unlike yesterday, when Kragoth had moved with the rigid precision of a controlled weapon, today, the Mortharians entered with the dignified bearing of diplomatic equals, their movements fluid and natural, their sensory stalks extended in what their human allies had explained was a gesture of peaceful intent. The events of yesterday revealed not only the corruption of one individual, Hale continued, but a systemic willingness to exploit sentient beings when they possess capabilities we find useful. Director Valen's methods were extreme, but they emerged from a cultural context that permits such exploitation. Today, we have the opportunity to change that context. Over the next several hours, the summit transformed from a resource allocation negotiation into something far more profound, a fundamental reassessment of interspecies relations throughout Orion-controlled space. The Mortharians, through their translators, shared insights into their culture that shattered many delegates' preconceptions. They described complex social structures based on mutual protection rather than dominance, hierarchies, sophisticated artistic traditions expressed through movement and resonant vibrations, and a philosophical tradition that emphasized the responsible use of predatory capabilities. Most compelling was Kragoth's own testimony regarding his experiences on Orion Prime. Speaking through the translator, he described how he had observed patterns of deception and manipulation throughout the station, his species' evolved ability to detect falsehood, making Valen's schemes transparent from the beginning. I was bound by neural compliance technology. The translator conveyed, but not blinded by it. I witnessed systematic targeting of those who represented competition or opposed exploitation. When the Earth delegation arrived, I detected something rare in this environment: consistent truth-speaking, even when inconvenient. This triggered an ancestral recognition response, what humans might call an alliance instinct. Lieutenant Colonel Voss, who had positioned herself near the Mortharians throughout the proceedings, added her own observations. During the Proxima conflict, there were documented cases of Mortharian groups forming spontaneous alliances with human outposts threatened by hostile forces. These weren't contractual arrangements, but mutual recognition of compatible ethical frameworks, despite vastly different biological origins. As the session progressed, resistance to the Earth delegation's proposals gradually softened. Corporate representatives, initially dismissive of what they viewed as idealistic moralizing, began to recognize potential advantages in a new approach to interspecies relations, particularly as the Mortharians outlined possible cooperative ventures that would leverage their unique capabilities within an ethical framework of mutual benefit. By the time the chairman called for a recess, the atmosphere in the chamber had transformed from tense skepticism to cautious engagement. Delegates who had earlier pressed themselves against walls when Mortharians passed now approached with tentative questions about their homeworld and culture. "It's working," Voss murmured to Ambassador Hale as they observed these interactions. "Not universally, but enough to establish momentum." Hale nodded satisfaction evident in her expression. Fear gives way to curiosity given the right conditions, and curiosity is the foundation of understanding. And understanding, added Dr. Reeves joining them, is the prerequisite for genuine alliance. The final sessions of the hastily reconstructed summit produced outcomes that would have seemed impossible days earlier: a formal recognition of Mortharian sentient rights throughout Orion-controlled space, the establishment of a joint research initiative focused on ethical partnerships with species previously classified solely as predators or security threats, and perhaps most significantly, a comprehensive review of all contracts involving sentient services, with particular scrutiny of neural compliance and similar control technologies. As delegates prepared to depart, many still processing the dramatic shift in summit focus and outcomes, a final ceremony was held in the station's grand atrium. Against the backdrop of the nebula that had silently witnessed the week's transformative events, representatives from 23 systems gathered to sign what was already being called the Orion Accord, a framework for interspecies relations based on mutual respect and ethical partnership rather than exploitation or fear. Kregoth, now formally recognized as a diplomatic representative rather than a security asset, placed his specialized appendage against the biometric scanner, leaving a molecular signature that symbolized not contractual servitude, but voluntary participation in a new kind of alliance. Director Valen, confined to a secure holding area, pending transfer to a judicial facility, watched the ceremony on a monitor in his detention cell. His face remained impassive, but the rigid tension in his shoulders betrayed the fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. His downfall was complete. His corporate backers had not only distanced themselves, but had enthusiastically embraced the new paradigm, eager to be seen as progressive rather than exploitative. In the station's docking bay, as the Earth delegation prepared for departure, Ambassador Hale found herself facing an unexpected decision. Vrex, the Mortharian translator, who had been instrumental in the summit's transformation, approached with a formal request. "Kregoth wishes to join Earth's diplomatic corps as a cultural attaché," the translator explained. "He believes his experience provides unique perspective valuable to preventing similar exploitation elsewhere. More importantly, he has formed what our kind considers a truth bond with your delegation, a rare cross-species connection based on mutual ethical recognition." Hale glanced at Lieutenant Colonel Voss, who had developed a remarkably effective working relationship with the Mortharians, despite the vast biological and cultural gaps separating their species. "Such an appointment would be unprecedented," Voss observed. "But then, this entire summit has been an exercise in breaking precedent." She studied Kregoth thoughtfully. "His insights would certainly be valuable in reforming security practices throughout Earth-aligned systems." Ambassador Hale considered for a moment, then smiled. "Tell Kregoth his request is granted subject to formal diplomatic accreditation. Earth's diplomatic corps has always valued diverse perspectives, though I admit we've never had an apex predator serving as a cultural attaché before." As the Earth vessel departed Orion Prime, its passenger manifest now, including an unexpected addition station personnel, watched from observation decks with mixed emotions. For some, the events of the past days represented a troubling disruption of established order. For others, they heralded the beginning of a more equitable approach to interstellar relations. For Kregoth, standing in the vessel's observation lounge beside his new colleagues, the stars streaming past represented not just a physical journey, but a philosophical one. He had come to Orion Prime as a contracted asset, valued only for his capacity to intimidate and, if necessary, to kill. He departed as a recognized sentient being valued for his entire spectrum of capabilities, including the evolved instinct that had led him to switch sides when faced with a choice between deception and truth. In the vast, cold expanse of space where survival had always seemed to depend on dominance and control, a new possibility had emerged that the strongest alliances might be those formed not through subjugation, but through recognition of shared values across the seemingly impassable gulfs, separating evolved intelligences. The apex predator had become a diplomat, and in doing so had helped transform not just his own future, but the future of interspecies relations throughout the Orion sector. As the station receded into the distance, becoming just another point of light among countless stars, Kragoth's sensory stalks extended in the gesture his human allies now recognized as satisfaction, the fulfillment of purpose that transcended mere survival to embrace a larger vision of collaborative existence. The contract was broken, but a true alliance had been formed.